Let's talk about equity. Let's talk about what we see. Let's talk about all the good things and the bad things that may be. Let's talk about it.
Eek. I know, it was a little corny, but I got to do something to keep you engaged.
Let's talk about equity. My name is Latish Reed, and I'm an equity leadership consultant.
This will actually be the third video that I'm producing in my series on equity. Please don't ask me how many videos there will be because I have no idea, but I will just be talking until the pandemic threat is over. So when we make equity a priority within our leadership and not equality, we are really taking a look at the historically marginalized. That means when there are issues of race, class, gender identity, religion, we are looking at what has been missing and what's really causing pause in terms of success for those particular groups.
In the Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction model to inform culturally responsive practices, we are focusing on the will or the desire to lead. In order to lead for equity, you must examine the systems of inequity that impact families and students.
Very early in my career as a young administrator, I had the great opportunity to meet Dr. Lorraine Monroe. Dr. Monroe was a famed principal at Frederick Douglass Academy in Harlem. She did amazing things with students that were particularly left behind.
In one of the professional development sessions I attended with her, I remember her saying that it is important to always inspect what you expect. So if we expect equity, then we must inspect for equity.
In order to put on an equitable lens, you have to look for the inequities, which means collect data on the inequities. One of the things that has become particularly clear is that there are huge disproportionalities as it relates to the COVID-19 virus and the Black community.
Ibram Kendi, famed race relations expert, wrote in his article, Stop Blaming Black People for Dying of the Coronavirus, that at this point, 29 states have released some racial demographic information on confirmed coronavirus cases, death rates. Both of these things have come from the COVID racial data tracker. The Associated Press had an analysis of available information around deaths, which stated that 42% of the victims were Black. That is doubling their share of the population in the state's analysis that was included. In Milwaukee County, where I live, 67% of the COVID-19 related deaths are Black people versus them being only 26% of the total population in the county. We only knew anything about this because people began to call for the data to be collected. So again, in order to identify the inequities, you must collect data.
Now that we understand who is most impacted by this illness, we have to turn our attention to the children. What about the children? What is happening with young people in our public school settings related to school technology?
I looked at New York, Chicago, and Milwaukee public schools and determined that they were doing some very similar things related to navigating this pandemic crisis. A major piece was to make sure that students had lunch because many of our students do depend on the school lunches. And so all three of these districts have grab and go systems for students to pick up lunch during this time. The districts also had packets made available to students with some supplemental support if students had internet or devices at home. Well, at this point, it became very clear that the districts had to do some polling and surveying of their students and their families to determine who actually had devices at home or access to the internet. New York, being the largest district, had to distribute 175,000 computers, and they were also getting additional support from Apple and IBM to distribute about 300,000 devices to students. Chicago and Milwaukee public schools began some sort of remote online learning during the middle of April. Now, what I will do is I will talk to you about what has happened with my son who attends a local public charter school. I know folk got problems with different kinds of schools and they have certain beliefs about who should get what, etc., etc. But at this time, we are in a pandemic and we need to figure out what best practices are. So, at my son's school, they had already been working on Google Classroom, so it was a very easy transition for them to move some of their assignments and the polling that is done in that particular platform. The teachers have been on board since day one. I received numerous communications from the principal with information on how to keep students engaged. There was actually a whole schedule that was sent home so that my son would know when he would have to actually get on a Google Meet with teachers and classmates. Basically, it was kind of like what has been happening with many of the colleges and universities that have opted to go online fully until the end of the semester, and most of them even through the summer. I discuss these differences because number one, we're not even talking about equity. We're talking about issues of equality access to instruction in the midst of this chaotic situation. And again, I know it's not easy. You can't compare a small school with a large district. But the key is that however we can keep our equity lens on and think in advance on ways that we can make sure our staff and students are updated on how to function in the age of technology, the better. What should be done? What could be done? How quickly can we get it done? Be responsive and coordinate. We have to remember that public school children are supported by public school dollars. And if public school children are not being educated, then we definitely are not using an equitable lens, nor are we even being equal. Given these disparities, these inequities that exist in our broader society and also in our school, in my next video, I will be discussing that we must believe all students can learn. And in order for us to do that, we must believe that all students have value. That means their families and the communities from which they come. Ooh-wee! The state of Wisconsin, where I was born and raised, has recently been in the national spotlight for disenfranchising the city of Milwaukee. On April 7th, there was a primary election held in the middle of the pandemic. There were basically I count five polling places that the entire city had to go to in order to cast their vote. I can't make this stuff up. On April 18th, in Brookfield, Wisconsin, a Confederate flag was a-flying. Hundreds of folks came out to protest and have Wisconsin open up in spite of there not being adequate testing and tracking to make sure that we are safe, and particularly the communities that have been impacted most. With that said, we understand that we can't believe that all people have value if we literally care not for them. With that, I send you off to examine the systems that impact your students and the families that you serve. Please comment on this video, like this video, share this video. And if you're interested in